I visited Bucha, of course. It's just such a symbolic place now. When you stand there and see it for yourself, it's a very different emotional. The military's morale is high. President Zelenskyy has definitely stepped up in a way that it's not traditional in the kind of political culture, bow before authority. We're seeing the formation of Ukraine.
Hello, my name is Yulia Mendel. I am a journalist, and today in the Kyiv Post studio we are having Simon Shuster. He is the Time correspondent who's been covering Ukraine and Russia for a long time. Simon, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We are usually asking people what is their experience during this large-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. Have you been here? Which places did you visit?
I've been here. I've been in Ukraine a while. The most recently, I visited Bucha, of course, because it's just such a symbolic place now. It's really a turning point in the war. It's a turning point for Europe. And we just published a story in Time this morning about Bucha and what it means for this conflict for Russia, for Ukraine, for the people of Ukraine. It's just a very historic place. I think that's the most important place I visited and story we've done so far. At the beginning of the invasion, we did a profile of President Zelenskyy based on communications with his team and past interviews I've done with him. And I visited Lviv and some places kind of along the way from Lviv to Kyiv, Makariv and so on, to see some of the destruction. It's a strange experience because before I came, I saw the photos and videos of these places, but when you stand there and see it for yourself, it's a very different emotional experience, especially for someone who knows Ukraine really well, and it's my country too. Half my family is from here. I've spent years reporting on it. So it's quite hard. I feel it in a way that wouldn't be the case for another country, another place I'd be covering.
So how did the people of Ukraine change? How they were changed by the war? As you say, you were covering before and now. Yeah. What did you see on the ground?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. There's pretty dramatic changes. I was talking to a member of parliament about this, and he had a very interesting way of putting it, that we're seeing the formation of Ukraine as a state, because for the first time in Ukrainian history, the attitude toward the authorities, the state, is not sort of dismissive or questioning. It's very respectful, loyal, patriotic, and people are ready to do what the state says. Whereas before, this lawmaker was explaining, and I agree generally from my experience with Ukrainians that is the case. It's not traditional in the kind of political culture to bow before authority. I think very much the opposite is true. And now what we're seeing politically, I wouldn't say people are bowing in a kind of slavish way, but they're really rallying around the leader, the symbols of the state. They're not thinking so much about their particular city or community or region, but it's really Ukraine as a whole taking shape as a political entity in a way that we haven't seen before. So it's really inspiring and interesting to observe.
I don't understand if you're praising Ukrainian people right now or if you're praising President Zelenskyy.
It's in many ways President Zelenskyy has definitely stepped up in a way that has created the conditions for this. If there had been a president who did leave the country and try to form a government in exile or something, or had just acted differently, not as confidently, I think it would have been harder for Ukrainians to unite around something in defense of what? It would have been in defense of maybe their land, their territory, their regions. I think military leadership would have still been there and stood up and stepped up. Symbols and the face of Ukrainian statehood, Zelenskyy has stepped into that role. The conditions tragically have created the opportunity for that, right? I wouldn't be shy about praising Zelenskyy and really stepping into that role and doing it very well, in a way that's inspired not only Ukrainians, but a lot of European leaders. Right now, there's a whole parade of European leaders who are coming to Kyiv, going to Bucha, to Borodyanka, seeing the devastation for themselves, but also it seems important to them politically back home to show physically the support for Ukraine. It's international policy for them is key to show where they stand in this terrible conflict. But also politically for them at home, they need to be seen, to put it simply, standing next to Zelensky, to physically show that they support him, they're with him, and to absorb maybe some of the leadership aura that he's now come to embody.
This is one of the media conundrums these days. Everybody is asking how could it happen that the intelligence and diplomatic corps and media, they predicted Ukraine would fall in days or hours. And here we are. And we are not gonna give up, right? Yeah. And we are gonna fight back and defend our land. What's the reason for this bravery or for, this victory, already a victory for Ukraine?
For Ukraine, victory means something very different than victory would mean for Russia. For Ukraine, I think staying alive, surviving, defending itself is already a victory. For Zelensky, simply staying in Kyiv, let alone staying in the presidential compound, was already a sign of very courageous leadership, right? Yeah, I think all it takes is to defend the land that is Ukraine's. That in itself would be, I think, a victory. In terms of all these predictions of Ukraine falling in 2 days, the predictions were that Russia would never invade, right? Initially, that this would never happen. Colleagues of mine that I know who thought this invasion was going to happen are the ones who are Washington-based and generally, their source base is more U.S. military, U.S. intelligence, U.S. governments. Because the U.S. government was the one that was really predicting it loud and clear. And essentially everybody else, the Europeans, people in Ukraine, the Ukrainian leadership were saying, calm down, the risk is there, it's higher now maybe, but it's been there for 8 years, we're used to it. And personally, I just couldn't imagine a scenario where Putin would begin to bomb Kyiv, a city that he himself has for years described as the birthplace of Russian civilization, of kind of the greater Slavic.
So what about the reasons? Why do you think Ukraine did not meet all those deadlines of 2 days, a few hours? Is that about bravery of Ukrainian people? Is that about underestimation of Ukrainian army or Russian army that is considered to be one of the strongest armies in the world?
Honestly, that was also another reason why I didn't believe the invasion was possible, because I'd spent eight years since 2014 covering the war since it started, from Crimea to Donbass and so on. So I saw where Ukraine started as a kind of post-revolutionary Ukraine, where its military started in its development after that point, after the war started. And it was impressive. I mean, I visited bases around Mariupol to Avdiivka in the east and saw the military preparations in 2021, in the spring of 2021. And it was very clear to me first that the military's morale is high, that they're much more professional. I mean, you can't even compare 2014 to now. And it was just obvious to me that if Russia did try it again, try to do what it did in 2014, it would be a very different fight. So Ukrainians have prepared, have trained, have armed themselves, over these 8 years in a way that was very clear to me that it would be a really bloody and difficult conflict, for Russia. But clearly, the Russian intelligence must have been such crap, that they didn't understand this. But anyone who had even a basic kind of understanding, knowledge, reporting on the development of the Ukrainian armed forces, I think it was absolutely obvious that they would put up a hell of a fight.
So how would you predict these relations in the future? Now we say never forget. Now we say it will be difficult to forgive. What about the people, who live on both sides of this border and both sides of the war, actually? Because the truth of the war is different for Ukraine and the West, and for those people who are fed with propaganda in Russian territory.
Yeah, it's a good question, an important one. I don't see how the two nations can go back to any kind of status quo ante after Bucha, and after Mariupol, and all the different areas of devastation. I think that can't. We're in such unimaginable territory, and events that really were hard to imagine, let alone predict 2 months ago. But I was just here today talking to people in the main market, Bessarabka, here in Kiev. They opened today for the first time, and the people were selling sala and vegetables and pickles and things. And I was talking to them. They were all saying, all of the people who were at the market, that the cruelty is so incredible on the side of the Russian forces that they just can never forgive that. I think it's a very typical point of view now. It's very understandable, and I have no idea what the relations are going to look like. I mean, the officials in the government I've talked to say openly that we need basically a hard border. End point of this war is it's not going to be going back to some friendly trade relations or kind of putting up with each other. It's going to be very, very hard, both on a personal level and a political and military level. I mean, one other thing I'd say is if the Russian people had behaved differently since the start of the invasion, if there had been more of an anti-war movement, I know it's scary. I know it's the punishments there are very severe for any kind of actions or protests against the war. If there had been more signs coming from the Russian public of their opposition to the war, I think maybe it would have been easier psychologically for Ukrainian people to separate the state of Russia, the Kremlin, from the nation, the people, the public. But honestly, observing it from afar, I haven't been in Russia since the invasion started, but I follow it closely. I talk to people there. There isn't a clear anti-war movement. There's, of course, the Kremlin has done everything possible to kill such a movement before it starts. There's very, very little resistance. I mean, you would expect some more active street protests, something like that. There were some minor ones in the beginning, but I think that has been also painful for Ukrainians to see. Where are the people going out into the street? Where are the people calling me, my friends, acquaintances on the other side of the border, calling me and saying, "How are you? Are you okay? We're sorry that this is happening." But I haven't heard a lot of that from Ukrainian people, and I think that's painful, and that's a bad sign for where relations are going to go at the other end of this war.
Do you think Ukrainian people are brave?
I definitely do. Yeah, it's astounding. The number of people who have stayed, signed up to fight. I mean, the territorial defense forces had to stop accepting volunteers because they couldn't process them. They didn't have enough resources to sign people up that were volunteering. They had to say, "Okay, wait, guys, there's too many of you." I have family in Odessa, and some of them left. The women and my niece left. My aunts and niece, cousin. But I have a Totya Galia who's, I think she's 84, and she's like, "I'm not going anywhere." She even refused to go down. And I'm not encouraging people to do this, but she made a personal choice that she's not going into the bomb shelter.
Many do.
Yeah, and it's sort of, "Что будет, то будет," is come what may. And there is a sort of defiance in that. Bravery too, but it's a very common attitude I've seen, that we are not going to take one step back. This is our land. You hear people say this everywhere. All kinds of people, all walks of life. Elderly people, women, kids. I mean, it's just it's universal, and it's understandable, and it's not changing despite the terrible atrocities being committed. I think that's only increasing the sense of defiance and bravery to not let the Russians take another town after what happened in Bucha and other places, Mariupol, to keep them out and push them back.
Simon, thank you for sharing your experience and insights from you with the audience of the Kyiv Post.
Thank you.
My name is Yulia Mendel, and I was talking to Simon Shuster. He's the Time correspondent, again coming back to Ukraine to report to the world what's going on here. Thank you for being with us.